Welcome to another edition of One More Light with me, Val Klein-Hands, where we chat about all things mental health. Today, I've got an expert on the show. Dr. Chloe Paidoussis-Mitchell is here. She's a psychologist, a coach, an author, an expert in trauma, loss, and grief. Dr. Chloe, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Val.
What's more difficult, being a psychologist, a coach, or an author?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think for me personally, it's a bit more difficult being an author because the thing that really energizes me, no matter what the despair, no matter what the devastation or the tragedy, when I'm holding the space for my clients, the experience of holding it and sharing in the humanity of that just gives me so much purpose and really actually energizes me. So I find that kind of in some strange way quite uplifting. And when I'm writing, I do quite a bit of writing. I'm currently writing a book. I don't get that experience. It's quite a lonely journey. Even though I love writing and I'm really grateful at the opportunity, I do miss that human contact. So it's a little bit more difficult for me, that.
Yeah. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by the contact and everything you're receiving?
Yes, sometimes, but I think part of my job and my, long training, it took me 9 years to become kind of qualified at the level that I am, is finding purpose and meaning in the holding of the space.
Ah, got it. That because it is important and we do need the
It
help.
really is, and I've witnessed it so many times with so many different people from all over the world. I do a lot of online work as well as face-to-face work, and something seems to happen that when we are compassionate and respectful and present, like really authentically present with another human being suffering, that suffering becomes more bearable somehow.
Yeah.
And I'm never overwhelmed to the point that I can't deal with it because I have respect for my clients. I think, well, if you're having to live through it, I can bear to connect to it and to hold the space for you. So I'm kind of okay with it. And I do have lots of rituals that I use at the end of every day to make sure that I don't absorb too much of that kind of negative tension and energy because so much of it is felt.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a balancing job, actually, a real
What
balancing job.
I can't imagine. What sort of rituals do you do to relieve yourself of all that?
Mm. Well, lots of things, really simple things, some of them quite ritualistic. So it might sound a bit weird, but I use water every day at the end of the day. And I sort of imagine that I'm washing kind of negative tension away. I do quite a bit of exercise. I'll either go out on a really long walk at my local park and just sort of, feel like I'm leaving it all behind me. I will do quite a bit of journaling where sometimes just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just reflecting on what's coming up for me, because of course you get the clients you need. And quite often I have clients that resonate with some of my own experience. So I make sure I look after myself with that. Um, Making time for joy and some fun, because when you're in my world, you're continually spending hours and hours in misery, really, in very tragic circumstances. So I need to counterbalance it with
Yeah.
something fun. So things like that, things like that,
I
simple
like
things.
journaling too. Journaling to
Do
me
you?
helps me get just all that anxiety or whatever it is I'm worried about just out. Like, I've
It's
let it go. It's on paper. I don't have
Oh,
to
I
write
love
it
it.
down.
It's so good. I actually have a little journaling practice that I always recommend. Just 5, 10 minutes at the beginning of every day.
Mm.
So before you've kind of launched into emails or meetings or whatever it is that's coming crashing into your day, take 5, 10 minutes to check in with yourself. Where are you at? What's coming up? And what do you want to do about it? How do you want to handle it? Find
Yeah.
that very, very liberating somehow.
So helpful. What inspired you to become a psychologist to begin with?
It's a bit of a long journey. So rather stupidly, I shouldn't say that, but I am saying it. I watched Silence of the Lambs when I was about 16, that
Oh,
film
I get
where
it. Okay. I feel like I know where this is going.
yeah, but sadly, so that was the beginning, and I thought, oh, that's quite an interesting job. I might like to do that. But then sadly, a very dear friend of mine lost her sister tragically, and then I witnessed trauma really quite aggressively and suffered some of it myself. So I went on and did my degree, and then ended up working for the BBC for about 7 to 8 years in organizational development psychology. So I didn't go straight into clinical work. I went into organizational work, corporate sort of creative world. And whilst there, I happened to be there when 9/11 happened.
Okay.
And saw the because I was a kind of sort of training and development person, there was a real shock at what the images were that were coming through, and we had really brilliant people who had maybe been very functional and performative during the Bosnian War, but lost it when they were seeing the 9/11 pictures coming through. And it became my job to go and find out what PTSD is and why is this happening to our good people and what do we do to help them as a kind of employer. And that reignited my connection with trauma. And I went off and I did my PhD in trauma and
Okay.
became quite specialist in that because I worked even in the BBC with brilliant, brilliant people who struggled to make sense of not only their physical reaction, but their psychological and mental reactions. And I became very inspired in a way to kind of find, create space for help.
Yeah.
That's my
Hats
journey
off
into
to
it.
the BBC for that as well, because we don't
Oh,
do
amazing.
we don't do things like that in the US for
Don't
I
you? Yeah.
I don't know why we don't. It was because I was part of a broadcast company as well,
Mm,
for a long time, and you see so many things when you're covering news and
yeah, absolutely.
you're in that environment, or just even being inundated with those images all day long. I mean,
Mm, mm.
it's exhausting, but
It
we
is.
don't have the type of people on hand to walk us through that, help us process that. It's just that's your doctor's problem. Go see your doctor,
Yeah,
or
well, credit to the BBC at the time. What they did is because that was a time when nobody really understood what PTSD was. There was
mm,
some research about Vietnam veterans, but there was some kind of confusion as to what do we do about it? Why is this happening? And it was the MOD actually that was investigating it through the Falklands War and trying to understand why so many of those veterans that flew back home that didn't come back on the ships ended up ending their lives. Like, why was that happening? Because there was a massive, massive loss of life like that. And I was trained by the MOD to become a trauma debriefer because the BBC felt we've got people in similar circumstances exposed to hostile environments. We need to take care of them. So yeah, credit to them. I don't work for the BBC anymore. It's been a long time since I worked with them, but I'm very grateful for the exposure really that I had when I did that work.
yeah.
It led
What do
me
you
here.
think?
So
Beautiful. Well, what are some of the best ways that we can respect someone while they're processing their trauma and their grief?
I think to humanize it is the most important thing. Not to, a lot of people want to sort of have a compulsion to fix it, to tell somebody what to do, or they want to see a quick kind of signs of hope. But when you're in a deeply dysregulated state, you can't really see beyond yourself. You can't really make a lot of sense of what you're going through because the impact is total. So, mental, physical, emotional, psychological, social, it's quite hard. So, best thing we can do to show respect is to hold space for it, empathically listen, no judgment, and sharing the humanity of it. It
Mhm.
can happen to anyone, right?
It can and it does constantly. That's why it amazes me when certain employers just don't recognize that.
Mm,
And I don't know, like some choose to, and some choose to provide those resources, and some just want nothing to do with it. And I wish
yeah,
there was more conversation about
yeah.
changing.
Yeah, well, it's brilliant that you're doing this kind of work because I've looked at the statistics recently, and we're looking at what we know is about 1 in 6 people with depression, 1 in 5 people with anxiety, 1 in 3 young people are self-harming in the UK.
Yeah,
And today, our government in the UK released some figures: 2.5 million people are off with long-term sickness.
right. And we have
Huge
millions of
number.
people on antidepressants here. Millions.
Absolutely. There is massive burnout following the pandemic, massive stress, the cost of living crises, the war in Europe, the financial disruption. Everybody is experiencing some level of trauma, whether a small, tiny t trauma or big capital T trauma. We need to humanize it. We need to normalize it so that people have a little bit of active hope.
Right. I've read that a lot of trauma comes from being just put in environments that leave us in that constant survival mode. I mean, some of us choose to be a part of it, and some of us don't. Some of us just grow up in it, and our body will hold tension in response or chemically react to what's going on. We don't feel safe in those scenarios. What can we do to help ourselves start to feel safe again and let some
Yeah.
go?
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant question. I think there are three factors that are fundamental to our mental health and well-being. So when we feel like the world is unpredictable, because our brain assumes that the world is going to be predictable, we get up every day and think, I'm going to have a normal day today. We don't, we don't, we can't tolerate too much unpredictability. So that's very important. Feeling like we have agency and control is very important. And feeling like we're safe, either physically safe or psychologically safe. So those are the three biggest factors that dysregulate our nervous system. And when we try and think about strategies to help people with that, we need to split it. Well, that's what I do anyway, into let's look at creating physical safety for you first.
Mm,
So let's attend to the body, because the body, once it's living in survival mode and it's got tons of cortisol flooding it, it can't see the bigger picture. So there's no point trying to process emotionally the trauma. You have to because the neocortex isn't available. It's important to just calm the system down. And there are simple things that we can do, like using the power of symbolic images. So a lot of the work I do, first thing is, let's come up with a safe space that in your mind's eye, you can go and hang out in.
mm,
And the power of that is that when you are sending your unconscious mind an image of safety that's symbolically powerful to you, and a lot of people come up with imaginary places as a first step,
mhm.
that means that your fight or flight response, your cortisol levels will slow down.
Mm. Okay,
And if
so
you
it's
do
this
that,
first step.
first step, regulating your breathing, really working with maybe focusing your awareness on noticing your breath coming in and noticing your breath coming out. That in itself can regulate the body. And doing lots of things like engaging in nature. If you can't get out into nature, even looking at nature helps.
Mm.
That's what the research shows us. Doing mindful movement like yoga, Pilates, gentle walking, swimming, or any mindfulness really. Sometimes meditation is promoted, but you've got to be really careful with that, because for
Oh,
some people that can be a trigger. So
really?
you
Tell me
have to
more
be
about that.
careful.
I never
Yeah.
heard that.
If you are too dysregulated, you can't access that sort of space of inner calm.
Okay.
You have to take it step by step by step. And I'm not saying meditation is not good, it's amazing, but you have to sort of see it within the context of the individual. And
Mm,
once you've done that, then the work is looking to see how your body keeps interpreting experiences. Does
mm.
that make sense?
Yeah,
How
I learned. I had no clue that that was even a thought. And wow, it's like, okay, yeah, we do have to focus on what is this impact really having and paying attention to ourselves.
Exactly. So we
It's a lot.
have we have the capacity to observe our bodily reactions and our emotional reactions. So noticing how your body is interpreting threats and stressors can become quite empowering.
Yeah.
And when you've done that, then you can work through the emotional process of what feelings you're carrying inside your heart around your trauma and your life, and creating restorative experiences. And of course, searching for meaning, imbuing your life with meaning. There's lots we can do. My experience, I've talked about this all day, as you can tell, but I'll just say this and then I'll shut up. But my experience is that when people go through trauma, they feel dehumanized and they start disowning parts of themselves.
Hmm.
And it's really important to kind of narrate and re-narrate the legacy of trauma on you and on your mental health and on your well-being. And you can do that. Like, people can do that. I've seen thousands of people recover, and it's an amazing journey when you're on it, when you're with those people.
Right. But it doesn't happen without that deregulation first. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
so many of us miss that. I miss that. I mean, I had such a hard
That's
time
interesting.
in the former industry that, I was part of. It was just it was not a good situation. It was a very toxic situation, and my anxiety and depression were heightened before I had any type of treatment at all. And
Mm,
I didn't realize that there were subtle clues to that that I could have paid attention to that I just wasn't seeing at the time. I was changing my hair to make myself appear lighter so people would be friendlier, just
little
little
things.
things like that, which I look back on and I'm like, that wasn't authentic to who I am at all. Why
Mm,
was I part
mm,
of that? But I was doing it because I thought if they view me a certain way physically, maybe they won't be as hard on me. Maybe they won't attack me today. Maybe they
mm.
won't, do X, Y, or Z or whatever today, but which wasn't true. It was the environment itself that was the problem. And until I removed myself from that and then actively worked on calming my system down, then I could start the process of, ooh, okay, what did we learn from that situation? And what can we do to not be part of that again? Because it
Yeah.
was not it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm fascinated in your story. Did you do some therapy? Did you get some professional help with that? Is it
I
okay
had
to talk
to.
about?
Yeah, I had to. It was at a point where I reached suicidal ideation.
Oh my goodness.
It
Okay.
was that bad. And,
Yeah.
uh, you know, thankfully I had a husband who was with me. I have a husband who was with me at the time. And he just said, okay, this isn't good. I think maybe you need some sort of treatment. And then I had an anxiety attack the next week because I was still at this office, still trying to make it work because we're told, work
Yeah.
comes first and let do your best. And then eventually somebody told me, you can go to the ER for this. In the States, you can walk in and say, I am experiencing these thoughts and I need help. And you can go to your ER and they will at least point you in the direction of a few treatment options, which I wasn't aware of until I had this happen to me. Um, they don't help you pay for it, which is a whole other conversation, but they at least guide you in the right direction. So
Mm,
I was guided to a group therapy scenario, and it was outpatient group therapy where they focused on showing you a variety of tools that you could use
brilliant.
to get through this. Whether it was mindfulness, we actually would practice mindfulness, practice simply observing thoughts and then letting them go. Or recreation, whether it was yoga
Yeah.
or stretching or tai chi. They called it social rhythm therapy, which was essentially scheduling out your day and making
Okay. Yeah.
you were scheduling yourself in a way that you were happy with and that made you feel productive and like you were doing
Mm,
something. So it was kind of like they brought you a buffet of different ways to handle whatever you were dealing with,
yeah.
and you just kind of walked away from that with choosing the one that works for you.
Love it.
Um, so it was helpful. And then once you start to mindfulness was the most helpful one for me. Learning
Mm,
how to let a thought be a thought and simply
yeah.
observe it and let it go. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be the end all be all or how you actually need to respond to
Yeah.
something. that
Yes.
that was the challenge for me. But
Mm,
yeah, it's exhausting and but learning how to deregulate was key before
mm.
for sure.
It's really, yeah, it's very, very important. Yeah.
So how can we recover, in the sense that okay, we've done the deregulation. We've done the work where we're calming ourselves down and we're able to maybe have discussions about these sort of things. What does recovery look like? How can we really
Mm,
truly recover after that?
mm. Okay. So I think, I mean, it's very personal and individual because different factors will play out in different people's experience. So there's something about re-narrating the legacy
Mm,
of that experience and really giving yourself an opportunity to reflect on what gives you that sense of well-being, what gives you that sense that you have control, agency, purpose, and a kind of coping well with your life. You're okay
mm,
with where you're at and who you get to be. They're very personal questions. And one of the things that I think we don't give ourselves much time to reflect on is, what do I want to create?
mm,
What's going to resonate with me? What's going to align with my values, with my hopes, with my dreams, with my energy, with my creativity, with the kind of person I am?
Mhm.
And we're sort of, I think, a little bit obsessed with what am I going to get?
Yeah, because we're told that that's what we always have to work.
Because we're told that that's what's important. But if you flip it and you say, well, what do I want to contribute? What do I want to give? What do I want to create? That that links us, I think, with a more authentic center.
Yeah,
And
what's the
less about the
messaging?
doing.
Right.
I'm quite obsessed with this in some ways. Like less focus on what do I do, and more about how do I be?
Yeah.
How do I want to be? And what's that like for me? And when we do that, we our compass is our values, whatever values they are, but there's personally meaningful to us. And when we have meaning, then we can overcome any adversity. It's when
Mm,
we don't have meaning, when it doesn't actually feed our soul, that we become quite overwhelmed and despairing.
yeah. When you're working with a client, do you ask them things to maybe help them find nuggets or clues as to who their authentic self is?
Yeah.
And what kind of questions are those?
Well, the first question I think that helps us with that is inviting them to reflect really honestly and openly with kind of what's it like to be you. Simple. I like to have to hold the space therapeutically in a way where we have a chat. We have a real in-depth discussion about what feeds you, what feels like it nourishes you, what are you enjoying, what don't you enjoy? So kind of questions that will allow my client to reflect on how they measure, what their subjective approach is, what kind of lens they're what kind of lenses they're wearing
Mhm.
to assess their happiness and their well-being.
Mm,
So I'm not particularly prescriptive because it goes with the flow, it goes with whatever the client brings. But that
yeah.
kind of question I find very informative because for me, recovery is about discovery
Mm, absolutely. Like you get clues as to who you are as a human. You're
as you go along. Yeah,
right. You're giving them the space to embrace who they are as a human. Even if those lenses are telling them that it's flawed, maybe doing that digging can say, well, this might not be great, but this is. And I
yeah.
can I can hold on to that part of it.
Yeah. And some of it is about recognizing what the internal climate is and
Mm,
how you're contributing and creating that.
mhm,
What you're telling yourself about yourself, what your relationship with yourself is like. Are you being really hard on yourself? Are
mm,
you rejecting yourself? Are you, what are you actually creating? And what sits outside of your control? And in my experience, I meet a lot of brilliant people who have got everything. In some ways, they've got everything, but they're really unhappy,
oh yeah.
really unfulfilled. And that's if you try and fill your cup up from the outside with transient things, holidays, cars, houses, I don't know, status driven things,
Mhm.
it's very temporary.
Yeah. We
It's
all
not authentically fulfilling. So it's kind of inviting them back in the room and saying, right, okay, let's get it all out. Let's start again. Where are you? What's it like? How are you with you? And a lot of people don't create opportunities to think about that, their relationship with themselves. Yeah.
and they don't have to do a lot to
No.
create that space. It really is just a matter of maybe taking 10 minutes
Yeah.
alone and just sitting with yourself and
Mm.
asking similar questions or you know
Yes.
and paying
Yeah.
attention to how you're reacting to it or maybe what the first couple thoughts are that come once you're asking yourself, do I really feel
Yeah.
this way about this?
Yeah. And also, last thing, I think there are a lot of people I meet, especially here for some reason, that have been diagnosed with a mental health condition. And actually, what's happened to them is they've absorbed quite a lot of feelings of people that they're connected to. So they're
Um,
empaths, they're highly sensitive, and they've taken in and taken in and taken in and taken in, and now they've got depression.
mm,
And some of the work is recognizing that. It's that power of observation, just checking in and noticing what's mine and what's not mine, actually. And can I get rid of what's not mine? I
Yeah,
find that's really, really important as well, especially if you've been in a traumatic situation.
definitely. What's next for you? What are you looking
Mm,
forward to? Whether it come
yeah.
just in general.
Oh, lots of things. The summer,
Yeah, yeah.
a little bit of sunshine. It's been really wet and grey in London for
Yeah.
months. So I'm looking forward to a bit of that, bit of time for me and time with my family. And really excitedly, I have a book coming out. It's called The Lost Prescription. It's going to be a practical guide to help people navigating all sorts of loss,
Hmm.
um, with practical tips and advice. And that's coming out in April 24. It's going to be by HarperCollins, so it's quite a big publisher, and I'm really
Yeah.
pleased. So that and doing more work to bring communities together because there's a lot of loneliness and a lot of isolation. So I run the grief clinic in London, and that's kind of what I'm excited about, bringing people back in the room to share, you know, to share.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
can't wait to see it all and to
Thank
follow
you.
the journey and see where it
Thank
goes.
you so
Dr.
much.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Val. Really, really lovely.